Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 6 to 7 very interesting and important articles out of the Hindu Newspaper. Topics itself, let's see what are the important topics we've chosen for today. We'll be talking about the second space age. It's a new interesting term and a very realistic question in GS paper 3 which can come through. Thereafter, AI and laws and legislation. Again, a very interesting article with regards to how different countries have put in a precedence and how we can also harness the power of AI and machine learning with regards to legislation and generally bills and laws in India. Thereafter, 4 very interesting but small prelims-based articles. First, talking about a new ICSSR program with regards to understanding the languages of our neighbors. Then we'll talk about a very unfortunate development with regards to no insurance coverage, 0% insurance coverage in the last year or the cycle itself with regards to livestock. Then we'll talk about a very important personality who's got a statistics-based award which is equivalent to the Nobel Prize in statistics. And last but not the least, tiger population, very encouraging news coming out of the whole census which has been done with regards to tigers. So, good morning, and with this, let's enter the first article. As always, out of these 6 articles itself, we'll have a small quiz for you ready on the Telegram channel. So, I hope that you will be giving that, and more than that, you're subscribing to the Telegram channel to not miss anything with regards to our videos. Let's look at the first topic. And a very interesting article from a diplomat, the second space age. Now, before I go into the nitty-gritty of the article, let's try to understand the larger context in which he's arguing for the second space age. So, the first space age came during the Cold War period by 1957. Once Sputnik, launched by Russia, was in orbit, the first space age had started. And an interesting point which has been pointed out by the article is that between this period of 1957 to 1970s and maximum 1990s, the total number of missions which would have gone into space would be 60 to 120. But out of that 90 to 95% of all missions were actually state funded. So either it was the USA or the USSR which was the most important impetus to space technology and space missions itself. However, what he's pointing out is that we have now entered the second space age, which intersects with the inauguration of the internet itself and direct-to-home technology and telecommunications, wherein today 90% of all rockets which go into the space are not state-sponsored or are not the government-based missions, but private. Private companies have now become the most important marker and engine of development in this sector, and SpaceX being the most important in that regard. Now, the first space age was more about politics. But the second space age is not about politics, it's about use of technology to make everything AI enabled, machine learning, and even internet accessibility in that regard. Now, if this is the background, in this background, the article talks about how did India respond in the first space age, and second, how can India harness the potentiality of the second space age. Now, before I go into the Indian journey itself and what is the basic argument, please understand this because this can come in the prelims examination also in mains. What is the second space age? The second space age is basically the concept of space missions and research into the space vis-a-vis private sector based companies. More than that, it is not based on the politics of the Cold War. It was not a race. It's about facilitation of all technologies which are available as of right now. So its inception intersects with the internet, and more than that, it has gone through a certain type of development because it started with telecommunication, then it went into remote sensing, then it went into navigation, and today it is about internet accessibility. So the second space age is what we live in today, and the first space age is state-sponsored space missions. Second space age is not state-sponsored but private sector-based. So here the first and foremost point you need to understand is what do we mean by the second space age. Second space age, as I said, private sector-based space missions, more about accessibility, AI, machine learning, not about the politics of the Cold War, who will reach first, and the other politics of the USA and the USSR. So this is the first point. So this first space age, which began in 1957 itself with the launching of Sputnik 1. Thereafter, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin will go as the first person in space, and then Neil Armstrong will be the first man to walk on the moon in 1969. This was the reality of the first space age. It was all based on the USA and USSR politics. But we live in the second space age. And when we talk about the second space age, how is that it intersects with our reality today? So the article gives us a very interesting set of data that between 1950 to 1991, which is the Cold War period itself, 60 to 120 space launches happened. Out of that, 93% of all launches were either the USA or the USSR government. So this was the phase in which governments, the NASA, was the most important impetus into space technology, space research, and generally space launches. So this is the government sector being proactive, but it was not natural. It was based on a race. It was based on a certain type of competition between the two powers at that point of time, USA and USSR, and therefore Cold War politics is what dictated this period. However, now we have entered into a phase that last year itself we had 180 rocket or space launches, out of which 61 were SpaceX itself. And if you take all the data across the world, 90% of all launches since 2020 are by or for the private sector. So we have now entered the age of privatization of space. And this is a very important concept which we need to understand, which is that we've moved away from NASA or the JAXA, the Japanese, or the European Space Agency, ESA, being the most important impetus. Rather, we have gone to the age of privatization of space technology and space itself. And therefore, the second space age in which we live today, the period of private sector dominating this sector, the inception when it came to existence, or when we see it as a major crossover point, it is when it interacts or when the internet technology came through. And more than that, it was accelerated, or the major impetus came when it was direct to home transmissions. So basically, when it came to DTH technology, television channels, and more than that, telecommunications, it is then that the private sector came through. So the first space age is based on the Cold War politics. Second space age is based on private sector, and more than that, it is based on the telecommunication boom and the internet. However, India's journey in this whole period has been a little bit different, because we did not have access to, or we were not the pioneering country with regards to space technology, with USA and USSR having already taken a very long lead with regards to how they were using their technology. However, our journey has been equally interesting, and we are catching up, and we have our own very specific, very efficient model of space launches under ISRO. And ISRO is one of those organizations which, as of right now, is considered one of the most trusted and cost-efficient way of sending a satellite into space. Now, India's journey has been a little bit different. How? Because India has taken a very standard route with regards to first experimental launches, then need-based concept, with regards to first telecommunication, INSAT and GSAT, then into remote sensing, ocean sat, and what we call Cartosat. And now we've come into the age of Gagan and Navik, in which we are now using it for navigational purposes. And we are very slowly moving towards the second space age, wherein the government-based systems are still dominating Indian space technology. But this is the whole point of this article, that we need to move beyond that and create an ecosystem in which the private sector can also harness the potentialities of this space or this opportunity which they have in this age itself. So we started in the 1960s, a very modest entry into this sector. And it's a very informative article with regards to GS paper 3 because it gives you a whole survey of what happened with regards to our space technology. Then we had a sounding rocket which we had borrowed from the US called the Nike Apache, which was launched from Thumba in 1963 and 69. Thereafter, we went into telecommunication, in which the first major project was the Satellite Instructional Television Experiment. It's called SITE. And again, it was based on a US leased satellite. We were not making our own satellites. 75-76 to reach 2,400 villages covering 5 million people with regards to certain form of information-based television direct dish technology. However, we then pioneered this sector and became one of the biggest players by launching what are called the INSAT series, the Indian Satellite series, and the GSAT series. So you have GSAT and INSAT as the first major satellite-based concept in which India became a major player, and we put in this whole constellation of what we call as Indian National Satellite System and Geosynchronous Satellite System, and these were for telecommunication. So till 1980s, our emphasis was on telecommunication, wherein it was DTH technology, and more than that, it was about information dissemination through satellite technology. So from just sounding rockets to going into telecommunication, we have taken the first step. The second step comes in remote sensing, when we now want to map our own geography and understand India, use it in mining, use it in agriculture. And once the Indian remote sensing programs come through, we have OceanSat and Cartosat. Cartosat and OceanSat about satellite technology with regards to understanding terrain and the ocean itself. And we peaked this very recently with first the Gagan project, which is ISRO plus Airport Authority of India plus GPS, Global Positioning System, to have a better air traffic control system in the Indian airspace. And the most celebrated and one of the major development with regards to our own navigation technology, where we have our own personal navigation system other than GPS, which is Navig, navigation with Indian constellation. This was the major emphasis of ISRO in the past 5 years, and very systematically we have now created a constellation of satellites which give us remote sensing capabilities also. So from first telecommunication to remote sensing, we have technically seen the whole arc with regards to how even the USA and the USSR went through. We started with experimentation, then we went to telecommunication, then we went into Indian remote sensing, and now we are technically playing with totally new understandings, which is a manned mission, then having a rover on moon itself. We even went with Chandrayaan, which is basically the concept of trying to put in a usable rover on the moon. Then Mangalyaan, where in regards to research on the Mars itself. So we have now moved totally away from what we need, telecommunication or remote sensing, and now our major emphasis is research. ISRO wants to be with Aditya L1 with all the different plans or the systems which we put in as of right now, projects which we talk about. It's about research. It's not about telecommunication, we put in that constellation. It's not about remote sensing, we put in that constellation. It's about research. And now is the right moment to create an ecosystem with regards to harnessing the second space age. Now, again, I'm repeating myself. What have we done till this point? We've tried to do two things. We first tried to understand what is the concept of the first space age and second space age. Second space age is very specific to the private sector, being the major source of what we call as driver of change in this sector, vis-a-vis the first space age where the government was important. And then we've mapped the movement of India on this route from experimentation to telecommunication to remote sensing, and now into pure research about the universe. Now, what the article points out is that our private sector is rising. and there's a major startup based industry which has come up, and it needs the right set of legislation, and more than that, over legislation, we also need a certain impetus and push incentivization from the government to make sure that we don't miss this train. So, very simply, the private sector, there are close to a dozen in the past 5 years and close to now 100. So, if you checked any space-based startup 5 years ago, maximum 12, 13, now we have close to 100 such startups which are either developing satellites or developing certain parts of the rockets. Therefore, there is a major push into this sector with $65 million being pushed in 2021 itself. It has doubled in the past 5 years. And the basic point is ISRO over a period of time has been a user, an operator, a service provider, a licensor, a rule maker, and now it needs to be an incubator. What it means is that ISRO needs to incubate or basically facilitate all the new startups which are there, so that India can truly enter into the second space age, and ISRO can actually go into a pure research based concept and pure research based institution. So ISRO can do research and our private sector can do putting in the satellites into orbit. So very simply, ISRO has had different roles over a period of time. Now its role is basically as an incubator. It is to help the private sector become what it should be, vis-a-vis the best example being say SpaceX. One important point which this article points out is that as of right now there's a major gap. We have different policies, we've been talking about a lot of things, a telecommunication policy, a space policy, this policy, that policy, but we haven't been able to materialize any form of piece of law which either facilitates or regulates. So in order to make sure that we don't lose this opportunity, first is we need a piece of legislation which helps space activities or a Space Activities Act, and further a legal grounding when this whole sector gets a major regulator, a basic regulator which can help develop this whole sector, the private space technology sector, into what it should be and what it isn't as of right now. So before I move into the next topic, let's try to summarize what we've done till this point. See, this article is very, very important for GS paper 3 because there's a new concept and a new term which has come into vogue now. And this term being second space age. And this first space age is based on government, second space age is based on private sector. Further, India's journey or ISRO's journey as a regulator, as an innovator, has been mapped in this article from just going for experimental launches to now having a whole constellation for navigation. ISRO's role needs to change into an incubator. India has a lot of potential with regards to this sector becoming a major player with regards to our economy and generally in the world itself. ISRO has founded its own space vis-a-vis the other launches which happen, vis-a-vis SpaceX itself. We still are the one which can put in a satellite at the cheapest rate possible, and therefore what is needed is an act which helps regulate this sector and one major regulator to make sure that this strategic sector is going to reach its potential over the next 5 to 10 years. Make sense, everyone? What is the basic topic here? What is the basic concept here? Second space age, incubator, legislation, major regulator, and generally the concept of India's journey in the whole arc of space technology. Yes? Come on, everyone. Yes? Great. Okay. Now we come to the second article, which is equally interesting based on legislation, but legislation, law, and technology. And what it talks about basically is the concept of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning in law. And what the article points out is that across the world as of right now, there are a lot of countries, specifically 4, which have a very specific AI-based model which helps the MPs and the MLAs, the legislators in that regard. The legislators can use AI and machine learning to be more efficient in giving us law. And more than that, this whole system, AI-based system or machine learning system, can also give us the specific model in which we can first, in a way, check the implementation of law, that does the law actually make sense, and second is that it can also talk about the impact of that law. Because we have a certain amount of data set, census data, and our laws itself, AI and machine learning is the new vogue, this whole new technology which can be used within lawmaking, and India needs that. But this article talks about 2 basic things. First, what is the potentiality? Second, what are the roadblocks? First, what it can do and it is doing in certain countries. And second, what is the problem here? The problem in India generally is that, see, in the US, in Japan, in Brazil, or in Netherlands, what AI is doing right now is facilitating the law, amendment, and generally subsidiary law sector. So in Netherlands, there's a basic concept of how AI is used for speech to write. People give speeches, that becomes a report. In the US, it's about differentiating between a bill and an amendment. In Japan, it's based on facilitating the concept of transparency. In Brazil, it is again on talking about transparency. However, in India, the problem is law making, law implementing, and law interpretation. Basically, the making of a law, implementation of that law, and interpretation of that law, these 3 things are quite different. And we have a parent act, and then multiple acts which are, or subsidiary amendments which are brought in to the act itself. And further, there is interpretations or Supreme Court judgments which change the interpretation of that law itself. Therefore, what India as of right now has is basically a whole constellation of law with another set of interpretations and with another set of implementation based concepts. So therefore, what India first needs is to simplify this system so that to use AI and machine learning, AI does not interpret on its own, it uses the data set itself. So therefore, the major roadblock in India as of right now is that we have, and the best example given by this article is that in COVID-19 itself, there was close to 900 notifications which the center gave and close to 6,000 notifications which the state gave. So first 900 and then 6,000 more coming from the states. So therefore, it creates a whole concentric circle of different notifications. And if AI has to go through this data, there needs to be a central repository for all of these things. More than that, what happens is a law has been created in a certain state. There's an interpretation in a different state itself, in a different language itself. More than that, there's the issue of interpretation and implementation. So there's a whole set of issues which this article points out. For GS paper 2, it's a very interesting and important article because it talks about the future of law. Because this whole concept of AI in law has become very common and is very fashionable and has become a major trend in the US and in EU. And therefore, India is the next major sector in which we can see that AI can help even lawyers and our legislators in simplifying the legal system in India. Because there is a problem with regards to law implementation, with regards to legal setup, and more than that, interpretation. The biggest issue is interpretation. Here, the law itself, the parent law and the interpretation is quite different sometimes, and in between there are basic judgments which come in the larger context. So, the artificial intelligence, AI, has attracted a lot of attention of entrepreneurs, policymakers, political leaders world over, but the most important implementation of AI as of right now has been in making better piece of legislation and parliamentary procedure with the better and smarter legislation which we can produce in. And this is a very interesting, important concept, that can law be made better? Yes, it can be, vis-a-vis using technology. So, what is the potentiality? Now, please pay attention. What is the potentiality very specifically pointed out in the article? First is that AI can analyze the citizens' grievances or grievances. Thereafter, social media responses, and flag issues and prioritize them. That basically, if there is a portal in which issues are coming through, or it's a basic redressal portal, AI can sort it and tell you which is the most important or which needs to be resolved the first. Further, it can help the parliamentarians in getting citizen input and public consultation with regards to preparing manifestos. Basically, it can create a certain mechanism in which public response to the law or public participation can be increased. Over and above that, it also can help enhance research quality, information about any bill, information about a house rule, or drafting amendment or interventions. Basically, it has use in every area where we think of law. Basically, it can be about citizen response. It can be about creating a certain ecosystem in which our laws are made better. It can be about better research. It can be just about looking for bills or precedents, because precedents matters in law. Now, do we have any examples of this being used across the world? Yes, we do. Herein comes the US House of Representatives use an AI tool to differentiate or analyze the differences between bills, amendments, and current laws. Basically, what was the parent law, how the amendment has come through, and what is the present case in that regard. And these things can be quite cumbersome, can take a lot of time also. Further, in Netherlands, we have a AI tool which is used speech to write system. In this, it uses the voice in order to create it into text, and therefore it translates voice into reports. So very simply, you don't need a stenographer, or you don't need to first go through the speech and then transcript it. No. The AI listens to the person and creates a whole text-based concept. And across the world, this has been seen as a major development with regards to how we can reduce the time in legislative processes. Further, Japan has a tool in which it helps for better responses to legislation and automatic selection of relevant highlights of the debate. Basically, there's a debate for 8 hours. The AI will automatically pick up what is the relevant highlights in that regard. Further, in Brazil, they have their own AI system called the Elysis. Elysis is basically about transparency and citizen partnership. So, citizen partnership and participation plus transparency. The AI tool allows for people to contribute into the legal procedure and give their basic suggestions, and the AI again sorts it and gives the most relevant suggestions to the parliamentarians. So it's not that AI is something totally new. It is being used in an economy as low as Brazil itself. So it's not that Brazilian democracy and Brazilian economy is considered, or parliamentary democracy is considered the epitome of a lot of things. Japan, Netherlands, and US are the ones which use quite a lot of technology within their legislative procedure. However, Brazil tells us that even a big country which has a lot of legal precedents and a lot of colonial baggage can also use these basic tools to make it a better law-making experience. Now, we understand the basic point. Yes, we are sold that AI can help in better legal procedure, parliamentary procedure, and generally in lawmaking it can be a revolution and can reduce the time of making a law, in making sure that we give a better response to the people, and citizen partnership and citizen representation within the legal system can be made better. We totally understand that. That is the first part of the article, which talks about what is the future and where it is as of right now. Now the problem is that in India we have a whole new set of issues, and though we want to bring in AI, The problem in India is that we don't have the what we call as machine based, or you can say a engine of information which can be used by the AI or machine learning. Basically, AI uses a basic data set to give you a certain response. It does not think like a human, it's artificial intelligence. So it needed, for example, ChatGPT only takes off whatever is given on the internet. So there's a repository in which it goes and takes out what is relevant. In the same way, in India, the problem is of codification, because it's quite opaque, complex, and huge gap or huge translation gap between law making, implementation, and interpretation. This is the biggest issue as of right now. The problem is that making, implementation, and interpretation are three different things in India, and more than that, where it is made, where it is implemented, and where the interpretation is coming are totally different data sets. And if we have to create AI-based tools, we need all these three data sets together so that the AI tool can then find a solution with regards to that. And we have a India code portal, but it's not that developed. It does not have everything in that regard. But what it needs to have, and why we need this major push into AI, it needs to have a complete chain from the parent act to the subordinate piece of legislations to amendments which were notified to give 360-degree coverage. Therefore, for AI to work and to change this whole sector, the most important concept is India needs to create a certain repository in which all parent act, subordinate legislation, and amendments are together. And this means that we need a laws machine consumable central law engine in which we can put in this data and get everything what we need. So before we move into the Prelims Bytes section, first you tell me, did these two articles make sense? Very path-breaking in that regard, very interesting because they give you a new perspective into first space technology and law. Then I'll give you a summary and then we'll move into the 4 small articles with regard to prelims. So first we understood the concept of second space age. Second space age is the one which is actually pushed in by the private sector, and basically the first space age was about Cold War politics, government-based understanding, and the second space is about private sector dominating missile launches and generally space launches and missions. Then we understood India's journey within this whole landscape of space technology, from experimentation to telecommunication to remote sensing to having our own constellation with regards to navigation. And this third aspect in that article was very simply that India needs to create an ecosystem for the startups which are there in the space sector. ISRO needs to concentrate on research, but also incubate and help develop these startups. And what is needed is an act, and more than that, a central regulator to make sure that this potentiality is harnessed. This was the first one. The second article, which is equally interesting, is on AI and legislation. Lawmaking in India is a complex process. It has making, interpretation, and implementation. And therefore, AI can help get us better and smarter law. And therefore, across the world, we have precedents for AI-based tools to help create better systems for parliamentary procedure or legal procedure. And the potentiality with regards to it's quite nice with regards to citizen partnership, better lawmaking, and generally creating a chain of precedents in law. The problem in India is, however, the fact is that we have a gap in the 3 major zones, wherein the parent law, its interpretation, and subordinate legislation is totally different and is scattered around in India. And we need to bring these three together in order to create the AI tool or an AI-based system which can give us better and smarter legislation. So it's a very, in a way, innovative sector, can be used to change lawmaking in India. But the major roadblock is this. if we can transcend this issue, if we can somehow find a solution, because it is going to be in itself a very major task to bring in the parent law, the interpretation, the implementation, and the subordinate legislation together. If we can do that, if we can get a central repository, then AI is the way to go forward. So these two articles have a very major bearing on GS paper 3 and 2, and I hope that the mains based current affairs what we've discussed till this point makes sense. Two very good articles. Remember, these new terminologies are always important for the examination, because UPSC is looking for these new concepts. That are you aware of the second space age? Are you aware of the potentialities of AI based legislation? So with this, let's enter into Prelims Bytes. I hope till this point the discussion has been clear and you are totally clear with regards to these two basic new concepts we have introduced to you. Perfect. Okay. Now Prelims Bytes, here the emphasis is not on the concept, but is on the detail. So first is a new scheme, if you want to call it, which has come through from the Indian Council for Cultural Research, the ICCR. The ICCR basically has launched a new concept which is called the Language Friendship Bridge. Now what do we mean by Language Friendship Bridge? See, across India, if you go today to basically any institute and you want to learn a new language, they will give you options with regards to English as it is. You have French, you have Spanish, but what is common to these three languages, they are all three are UN languages. So English, French, Spanish, UN languages. You'll also get an opportunity to understand Portuguese, maybe a little bit of Mandarin. But the basic point is, in India, we don't have an emphasis on learning the language of our own neighbors. And herein, there has been a major communication gap. So what the ICCR and the government of India has thought about is that we need a ecosystem, if you want to call it, a expert group which understands the language of our neighbors and also creates a bridge, and that is the concept, the language friendship bridge, a bridge between these two countries. So the fact is that India is planning to create a pool of experts in this language spoken in the countries which are our neighbors, specifically Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Uzbekistan, Indonesia, to facilitate people-to-people exchange. And the languages which are in question are actually 10. You have Kazakh, Uzbek, thereafter Bhutanese, Ghoti, which is the spoken in Tibet, Burmese, Khmer, which is Cambodia, Thai, Sinhalese, and the Bhasha, which is in Indonesia and Malaysia. Basically, these 10 languages have been chosen, and India will create at least 5 to 10 experts in each of these languages, which can develop certain departments in the universities and also create a basic sector in which people can learn it. Because why only learn English, French or Spanish or Portuguese? Why not learn the languages of our neighbors with which we interact quite a lot? So remember, the Language Friendship Bridge scheme is about creating a certain ecosystem for languages which are used in the Southeast Asian sector and our neighbors. So it's a very interesting development, and India and the Foreign Ministry itself is realizing the importance of knowing these languages and generally creating a cultural interaction. This cultural exchange can also act like a concept of soft power, and that is the basic point. Why are we not investing in soft power vis-a-vis our neighbors? So why is that they also need to speak in English, we also need to speak in English? Why can't they learn our language? Why can't we learn their language? This is a new perspective, a major pivot away from what is called the globalization of language itself, English being the most important. So it's an interesting and an important development because it shows a pivot away from what is the order as of right now, which is learn a UN language, but UN languages are not known in Asia itself. Why not also invest in an ecosystem for languages for our own neighbors so that we can interact with them and also we can get opportunities and create employment vis-a-vis people who can translate for India also and for them also. So it's a very important and new concept, comes from art and culture section, an important scheme in the newspaper. Further, this is the concerning news, wherein in the past 1 year, though we have a scheme with regards to livestock insurance, which is cattle insurance in a way, 0%, nobody got insured. No cattle was insured in the government scheme, whilst in 2021-22, 1,74,000 cattle were insured under the scheme which was there. Now, the Parliamentary Standing Committee has asked this sector and the ministry that why was there zero insurance coverage vis-a-vis livestock in 2022-23, and now the center is considering revamping the livestock Bima Yojana or the livestock insurance Yojana in the model of Fasal Bima Yojana. And the beauty of Fasal Bima Yojana, which is basically insurance of the land and the grains itself, is the insurance premium was very low. The problem with regards to cattle or livestock, what we call as insurance, is that they are not able to push in a premium which is somehow affordable to the people and specifically to the farmers. So as of right now, less than 1% of the country's cattle is insured, and the average premium is 4.5% of insured amount. So if 100 rupees is the insured amount, the premium is going every month or annually or basically monthly, cumulatively 4.5%. Now basically this is quite high vis-a-vis 1 or 2% in Fasal Bima Yojana. So the government is now considering either creating a new scheme itself or revamping this scheme to make it more affordable. The basic point is there's a whole dispute between the insurance company, the government and the farmers, in which the farmers are caught up. Further, the problem is of unaffordable rates of premium itself, and now the government is considering either we should go for subsidy or create a totally new scheme itself in which the premium is lower. So why am I discussing this topic with you? Because it's not about the scheme which is going to come. It's about the coverage aspect. If in the prelims examination it says that we have half, 10%, 20% livestock insurance coverage, that is technically not true. It is only 1%. Further, the problem is that with regards to the last year, zero cattle, none. Nobody insured their cattle under the scheme available because of the disputes, unaffordable rates itself. And this is a concept which is going to for sure lead to a new scheme or revamping of the scheme itself, wherein more lower premiums will come in the larger context of how this sector needs to protect our farmers. And more than that, livestock and cattle is one of the most important sources of additional income for our farmers, and there needs to be insurance vis-a-vis disease and generally natural disasters. So it's an important concept in that regard. Then C.R. Rao, at the age of 102, he has won the International Prize in Statistics for 2023. He is an Indian-American statistician, and this International Prize in Statistics is equivalent to Nobel Prize for Statistics in that regard. And though you don't need to know the theories which he introduced, the fact of the matter is that first you need to remember his name for the prelims examination generally. Then this award is given twice, meaning it is given every 2 years, so bi-yearly, and therefore it is not a very well covered award because it only happens once 2 years. So we get this news this year and then it does not remain current affairs for the next 2 years. So because he has got this award this year, this is a major potential question which can come in. A bi-yearly award becomes important because a yearly award, every year you will have somebody who will come through. This is only once in 2 years, therefore important. And his first article which he published, which gave him recognition at the age of 25 itself, was Information and Accuracy Attainment in Estimation of Statistical Parameters. You don't have to learn this, but at the very, very young age of 25, he actually made his name within the statistics sector, which was dominated by European statisticians. And one of the most important contributions of his is in 1948, he introduced what is called the Rao score test, which is still today used as a generic approach to testing hypothesis. You don't have to know what it is, but basically C.R. Rao in himself is a very towering figure in the statistician or in the statistical universe, and therefore this award, which is equivalent to the Nobel Prize for statistics, is very, very important for your preparation. As it is, the award is given once every 2 years. So now the next award will be in 2025. So for the next 2 years, this is going to be a very important current affairs in the larger context of our preparation. And then last but not the least, and then I give you a summary and we can move to the mains question. Tiger population, and very encouraging news with regards to 2022, because we have, after a very long time and maybe for the first time in this past 2 decades, crossed 3,000 as the total population of tigers in India, and this number has been progressively increasing, and it's very encouraging, wherein Project Tiger is working and our efforts to conserve a very iconic animal of India is paying fruit. But if you look at the regional variation, we get a major change, wherein the tiger population is growing in the Shivalik Hills, the Gangetic Plains, Central India, Northeastern Hills, Brahmaputra, and the Sundarban sector. However, in the Western Ghats, the number has been declining. Now, this is basically a testament to how human and animal conflict, and further how the Western Ghats sector, which has been quite in the news with regards to basic infrastructural projects, highway development, how infrastructure development, highway development and human activities can impact tiger numbers. So this is a very interesting micro analysis of how in a sector where we actually would expect more population growth, it is going down, and vis-a-vis North India, we are seeing a major uphill trend in regards to the population of the tigers, wherein the protected areas are actually not interacting with human habitation. There's a better story of population rise, but in Western Ghats, there is more human and animal interaction, specifically tiger and human interaction, and that is leading to a major concerning aspect with regards to how the population data is showing us regional variation. So this is the first point we need to understand here. As it is, 3,000 is a very good number, very healthy number, but where we expect it to go up, it is going down, and everywhere else overall numbers are good because of the story which is there in the northern sector itself. Second, what is important for you to remember is basically under Project Tiger, when it started in 1972-73, today there are 53 reserves spanning 75,000 square kilometers of India, which is close to 2.3% of Indian land area. And Project Tiger has now become a success story across the world, wherein if we have the will and the correct regulatory mechanism, we can actually change the whole order with regards to first vulnerability and the threat of extinction of very important indicators of the health of a biome such as the tiger. So before I go to the mains questions, let's try to summarize what we've done in this session. First, you tell me prelim section 4 very basic articles. I hope you get the point of the discussion. Very standard, straightforward, data-based articles. You are do perfect. Now let's try to summarize what we've done in this session. First, the concept of the space age concept. So the concept of second space age, wherein private sector, ISRO's role as an incubator, an act and a regulatory mechanism and a regulator, Then we understood the concept of AI and lawmaking, wherein lawmaking can be made better via artificial intelligence. And thereafter, we've understood very simply 4 very small but important articles. The ICCR project with regards to understanding and developing a whole expert committee or a whole family of experts in the languages of our neighbors. Then we understood the tiger numbers itself, above 3,000, but Western Ghats is showing a declining trend. Then C.R. Rao, a towering figure in statistics, he is technically getting or got he got the most important what we call as international recognition vis-a-vis statistics, and then the livestock coverage less than 1%, 0% in the last cycle itself. With this, let's look at the mains question. What is the second space age? How can India harness the potentialities of this age? A very important realistic question with regards to GS paper 3. Then, how can AI and machine learning produce better and smarter legislation? I just picked up the words from the article itself, and this looks like a GS paper 2 question in that regard. So, before I end the session, thank you so much for your patience. I hope all the 7 articles made sense to you, and generally remember the mains based concept. You need to understand the larger context and argument, and in prelims you need to know the basic facts. With this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much for your patience. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.